the kind of living arrangement we need to retrofit for the future. We need, I'm not sure, in some cases it's going to be possible, to tell you the truth. I mean, some places that are far outside of central cities, especially in desert regions, are going to be extremely vulnerable because it's going to be very difficult to grow food there. But what we're going to need to do is think about ways to get people connected, to localize production of basic needs, of using oil much less, volumes of oil much less in other forms of transportation, and potential electric cars and that sort of thing, sure, but remember the scale that we're talking about. Other vulnerabilities I thought I would mention, our whole industrial organic chemistry relies on oil. That is the feedstock for most of the products that we use. When I give a talk to students, I say, look around the room and see everything that's made of plastic is made of oil or natural gas. That was the feedstock for it. So the carpet, the desk that you're sitting on, the paint on the wall, the laminate, everything is made of oil. So we're going to have to think about redesigning that kind of industries, those kinds of industries, to rely on other kinds of feedstocks, and probably less of it. There was a study done by the Department of Energy that determined that oil pervades the U.S. economy. They went into an average Home Depot store and found that only 4% of products didn't rely on energy in some direct fashion. So, and you also have to consider the transportation of these products as well. So if it's timber, sure, it's not made of oil, but oil was responsible for cutting down the tree and processing it and timber, the whole production scheme that brought you the material. This is one that concerns me greatly, food production. I ask students to think about the fact that they are literally animated by oil. If you eat food, especially you eat food, but if you eat food derived from industrial agriculture, about 10 kilocalories of energy go in for every 1 kilocalorie that comes out. So we literally pour oil onto the farm fields. And these are all the ways in which we do it. Tilling, sowing seeds, pumping water for irrigation, herbicides, pesticides, nitrogen fertilizers, cultivating and harvesting, processing, packaging, refrigeration, and transportation to market. All reliant on fossil energy. Even if you're eating organic food, which I do, and using less oil, you have to account for the transportation of it as well. And I'm happy to co-own an organic farm back in Bloomington, but we found that we require a tractor now and then. It just simply isn't feasible to go with complete human labor. Maybe we'll get some draft horses soon. So it's no surprise then that human population on the planet really pretty closely correlates with the production of oil. So oil has allowed much more productivity of the land. So this is something we really have to think about in the future. How are we going to feed billions of people on a declining resource base of oil? There are ways to do it. It's a pretty depressing slide, but there are ways we can do it. We don't have to just throw up our hands and say, oh, it's over. Who else is currently warning? I want to shift gears a little bit just to say, well, who is Dave Rollo anyway? What does he know? I've never seen him before. But there are a lot of significant people, groups that are coming forward now and admitting to the problem. And I wanted to just mention a few. There are many out there, and I don't have time to mention them all, but I wanted to mention a few because these are fairly significant. And what I say is that disclosure of this problem, which I think has been hidden from the public view for various reasons, I don't necessarily say it's a conspiracy, but what I'm just saying is it's not a pleasant topic, and frankly, it's not something that keeps the consumer economy going as it is, as it has done. So people are loath to talk about it. So the admission, maybe I should say the admission is inevitable and possibly soon. Some of the latest developments are an industry report from Britain, which sent shockwaves really through the public and through the British government, where people are really demanding attention to it. In part, it's because the CEO of Virgin International, someone help me with his name. What's it? Richard Branson, he's kind of a celebrity, you know, he's this kind of charismatic guy, long hair, and he's a billionaire. And so he's the one who spearheaded the public kind of announcement of this and got a lot of attention. But it was made up of a number of different industries in Great Britain, and they warned the British government that that oil shortages, insecurity of supply and price volatility will destabilize economic, political, and social activity potentially by 2015. And then they gave the whole report and analysis, which I won't go into, but you can get it online, and I suggest it because it's very good. It's a very good analysis. The second one, which came a bit later in March of this year, was significant because it came from Kuwait. And Kuwait is a member of OPEC, and OPEC doesn't really have an interest in disclosing the fact that they're running out of the stuff, the very stuff that is supplying them with the tremendous wealth that they've been enjoying for decades. It came from the College of Engineering and Petroleum at Kuwait University, and it was using a technique that was developed by Hubbard himself, but it was using more advanced computer modeling. And what they discovered was that world production would peak in about 2014 and then follow a depletion rate of about 2.1% per year. And it was published in a journal, trade journal, Energy and Fuels. Another pronouncement, this also from Britain, was by their chief scientist, the UK government's chief scientist, David King, and researchers from Oxford University. And it was published in the paper, the paper was published in the Journal of Energy Policy. What they discovered was that reserves, the ones that we rely on for predictions of future production, are likely exaggerated by 1/3. And what they note is that particularly OPEC exaggerated their reserve totals by a tremendous amount, sometimes doubling the amount that they claim they have double what they actually have. And it was sort of an artifact of a policy they adopted back in the 1980s, where you could, if you think of OPEC, they're a cooperating cartel, but they're also competing and they're cheating on one another. And they decided, well, you can produce as much as you claim that you have. So they immediately, within a couple of years, everybody claimed they had double what they previously had, without discovering any more oil. So it showed that conventional oil reserves stand at just about under a trillion barrels, and not over a trillion, which officials have claimed in the past. Pretty significant. And then the final one is really amazing. It's amazing on several counts. One is that it was an admission by the U.S. government, but it never reached our media, or the media never picked up on it. But it was reported in Le Monde, a major newspaper in France, March 25th, 2010, and the article was Washington considers a decline of world oil production as of 2011, very soon. The U.S. Department of Energy admits that, quote, a chance exists that we may experience a decline of world liquid fuels production between 2011 and 2015, quote, if the investment isn't there. So they're couching it in, don't worry, if we just pour more money into it, it'll be all right. According to an exclusive interview with Glenn Sweetnam, the main official expert on the oil market in the Obama administration. So he was asked about whether this represented peak oil. Was this an admission that we were at peak oil? And he said, no, we don't believe in peak oil. What we believe in is an undulating plateau. And furthermore, once maximum world oil production is reached, that level will be approximately maintained for several years thereafter, creating an undulating plateau. After this plateau period, production will experience a decline. So I don't believe in peak oil, but he described essentially what people in the peak oil community were saying. And it's not only his quotation that was significant, this was a slide from his presentation that he gave in France. And by 2012, what we will experience, according to him, is a gap between the world liquid fuel supply demand and what they call, and then the production that we can expect filled by unidentified projects. Now that was a clear giveaway because it takes, from the time of discovery to actually producing the oil, it takes about 10 years. So if we haven't discovered something here in 2010, almost 2011, and we're reaching an area of a growing gap within a couple of years, we're in trouble. So I should say that after Glenn Sweetnam came back to the U.S., he was put on year leave from the Department of Energy. Oh, I have one more report. This comes from, significantly, the U.S. Army. A report from the American Joint Forces Command published March 15th predicts that in 2015, I think they're going on the Department of Energy's estimate, the world capacity for petroleum production could be 10 million barrels per day less than demand. If you go back to that graph, and by 2015, that's what we're looking at, about 10 million barrels per day. So they're looking at the same data that the Department of Energy is. 10 million barrels per day is not insignificant. It's not trivial. It represents the whole production of Saudi Arabia. So imagine going without Saudi Arabian production worldwide. Okay, so I wanted to give you that for some background because I didn't know if you were familiar with that information. So why haven't you been informed by the government or the press of this is a question I want to ask. And this is speculative on my part, so I'll warn you of that, but I think that there's some good reasons to think that this might be true. Yes?
Because of the generated revenue by the taxes on the oil and how the oil companies have infiltrated our government.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure that has had a lot to do with it. There's been a lot of, let's say that to put it mildly, our government is not necessarily responsive to the average American, but they are responsive to the oil industry, and I think we saw that in the Gulf. And I'm saying this, I'm a Democrat, but I'm saying this nonpartisan. I think everybody should recognize that, and I think that I'm tired of the partisan bickering. I think that this is an energy security crisis our country is facing, and I think that we need to get beyond the blame game and start actually talking about solutions, like all of you have been doing, as the previous speaker said, by the way. But one thing I'd like to offer is kind of a psychological observation that humans are linear thinkers, and we think of the past, we think the future is kind of an extrapolation of the past into the future. But really what we're experiencing and is what's being described in scientific journals around the world right now is that we're subjected to exponential growth in many different ways. Not just economic exponential growth, but resource use exponential growth. Population growth has been exponential. And that is not a linear process. We're likely to encounter some abrupt surprises by the experience of exponential growth. We don't think about exponential growth, but it can creep up on you very, very quickly. And I recommend a physicist by the name of Charles Bartlett, who is at the University of Colorado in Boulder, Albert Bartlett, and go to YouTube, and he explains exponential growth to his students, and it's well worth listening to. The other reason, I think, another reason is our way of life depends upon our current system. We don't like to think about abrupt changes. We have a predictable life. We'd like to have a predictable life. And here's my to-do list. We have to pay rent. We have to get new tabs for the car. I have to pick up my dry cleaning, get milk, tackle laundry, prepare for peak oil. That's, kind of beyond our kind of realm of thought. And so we're just not naturally inclined to think about it. The other is that social leaders and experts cannot or will not admit that we have a problem. And I think it's up to us to start waking them up to some extent. It also is a matter, I think, of whose interest is it to tell. It's not in the oil company's interest to tell, as this gentleman said, as James said. And it's hard for politicians, let me tell you, I mean, even on a local level, to say, here's a huge problem. And frankly, there's really no solution in the sense that we've been thinking about it. I mean, business as usual solution. What I mean by that is we're not going to just drill baby drill to get out of this solution, to get out of this problem. It's going to take some major adaptation and behavioral change and a shift in our priorities as a country to things like renewable energy immediately. We're very late in the game, actually. It's a message that is frankly incompatible with campaign speak. You don't run up for an election and say that. Your opponent says, "Oh, you're a doomer. What are you? It's morning in America. Don't worry, vote for me." And the message is incompatible with appeal for corporate donations. Corporations simply don't like to hear that there's bad news on the horizon at this scale, I think. The media, I think, is dysfunctional in many ways, but part of the reason is because they're large corporations themselves. They get revenue from selling essentially audiences, you and me, to other businesses.